We've been talking these last few weeks about Jesus' messages to these 7 churches at the beginning of the book of Revelation. And you may know that in biblical times, often people were killed for their faith. They found out you were a Christian, you might be killed. And we know that in current times, in other countries, people are routinely killed for their faith. If they're not killed, they might be shunned from their families. They're disowned. They have nowhere to go. Just for holding on to their faith. But you might think it's a little odd because we're not killed for our faith, and we're not persecuted for our faith like people in other countries might be. We don't lose our family and our job for pronouncing our faith in Jesus Christ. So as we're reading through this, you might find it a little odd. How does this relate to your life? Yes, we know these things did happen, and we know that they happen in other countries, but not here in America. So you might say, well, what does this have to do with me? It's great to learn about it, but how can this apply to my life? After all, we're in the United States, and specifically we're in the southern United States. A lot of us have grown up in church, or we've grown up around church at minimal. Even if you didn't grow up in church, maybe you went to vacation Bible school once a year. You had friends who were in church. Many of us, not only are we Christians, but our neighbors might be Christians, and even your employer might be Christian. Many of us have never had our lives threatened for being a Christian. I bet many of us wouldn't even personally know somebody who has that story. Now, in our passage this morning from Revelation chapter 2, we are told to hold on to what we have. But again, what does that mean for us today? For people who don't seem to face persecution, whose friends and family and neighbors and employers are probably Christian. What does this have to say to us? Well, I want to answer that by telling you the story of a little church. Actually, it was a fairly large church, but in a small town. This was the kind of town that you would drive through in order to get to the next larger town. But this small little church had a church larger than any of the surrounding churches in any of the larger towns. And this town was a sort of a crossroads. So it went from being a small population to being a booming center of commerce because it was at the center of some crucial crossroads. So eventually, it became a commercial center with people driving by. They had a large textile industry. In fact, this is where you would typically go if you wanted to dye your fabrics. They had some skilled metal workers there who were really good at working with brass. Most of the people in that town, where that church was, were Christian. And again, even though it was a small town, their church was larger and thriving more than the churches in the larger surrounding places. And when I say their church, I don't just mean the church building. Because the church is a people, it's not a building. The building is great, but the church is the people. One person who was talking about this church even said that when you're building something, you want to choose materials that are strong and reliable. And similarly, when you're building a church, you want members who are strong in their faith and they are reliable. And he said that's what this church was. That they were strong in their faith. They were loyal to the faith and to each other and to their community. That's high praise for this church, isn't it? It said that there were at least 4 other traits that this church was known for. When you thought of this church, these are the 4 things you thought about. First of all was love. That church was a loving church. Now, the other churches around them, they could get kind of stuck in a rut. Sure, they were doing the outward appearances of things, but they might just do that going in the motions and following the routine, but not this church. They were genuinely loving people. Not because it was some routine, not because they wanted to do good things just to pat themselves on the back, but they genuinely loved people. And because of their genuine love for people, they had a heart of service. That was the second trait. They had a heart to serve other people. They had a heart for missions right where they were. You didn't have to tell them where the mission need was. They knew because they knew the people, they loved them, and they took care of each other. They took care of their community. The third thing is they were faithful. They showed their faith not just on Sunday, not just on Christmas and Easter, but they showed their faith everywhere they went. Not just in that church building, but everywhere they went, they showed their faith. And last but not least, they held on to their faith. When times were good, when it's easy to hold on to your faith, but also when times were bad, when they were stressed, when their faith was put under pressure, when times got tough, they held on to their faith. So this church had a lot of great things going for it, but it also had some challenges. Just like the place that they were at geographically had some real advantages, it drove commerce into their city, it also came with some problems. Because as commerce grew and jobs grew, and that's all great, trade unions grew. And now in the South, we don't have as much experience with trade unions, working with a union. Some of you may have experienced that at some point. Most of us have not personally experienced it, but we're familiar with it. We know what it is. We've heard stories. We've seen other people. We've known people. And again, some of us, we come from other areas. We may have experienced unions in the past ourselves. But pertinent to this story, for this little town, was that the trade unions were a big deal. If you were not in the trade union, you might as well pack up shop and go home because your business wasn't going to survive. You kind of had to play nice with the trade union. So most people were a part of that at some point. Now, the trade unions, they would get together for meals. Think of it in our context as the company picnic. And just like when we have a meal, we might get together and have a prayer to Jesus before the meal. They would get together and they'd have prayer too, but it wasn't to Jesus. They would pray to some false god. And so they would make a sacrifice to that god. And they'd say, whatever is left after we burn this meat, after we cook this, whatever is left, that's what we're going to eat. That's our meal. So I want you to imagine, in your own context, maybe a job you have now or a job you've had in the past, think about you're at the company picnic. You're there with your co-workers and whatnot. You're having a good time, and because it's work-related, you kind of have to be there. You need to be networking with the other employees. You need to be networking with vendors and customers, and you need to be networking with all of these people. But not just that you have to be there, you want to be there. These are your friends, your coworkers, your family, your neighbors, maybe even people that you go to church with. And you're having a good time, you're socializing, maybe it's a pig picking. You got your plate at the barbecue, your life's good. And as you're getting ready to enjoy all of this means, someone stands up and says, all right, we're going to have a sacrifice to Balaam. You go, now what now? What's he talking about? Someone says, I want you to bow your eyes and pray after me. Say, yeah, I'm used to this. And they start praying to some other false god. And they start using words and language that you don't understand. Say, what is this about? You'd probably be a little bit confused. Because remember, this was a predominantly Christian town. But then to have, at the company picnic, a sacrifice to some false god, and they're praying to some false god, you go, I don't understand this. You look out at the crowd of the people who's got their eyes bowed and they're praying along with this pagan prayer, and you say, that's my neighbor. I know he's Christian. That's my family. That's people from my church. I recognize these people, but they're all partaking in this pagan ritual. They're praying to some kind of false god. I don't understand how this could happen. Now, Paul once wrote in 1 Corinthians that if you wanted to buy meat that had been sacrificed to idols, you could do that. Because what would happen, they would sacrifice this meat to idol, whatever was left, they would sell that. They would eat that or they'd sell it. So a tradition they had was you go to the meat market and you wanted to buy a good cut of steak. You might have grade A steak, Angus beef, whatever you want to call it. You have a great steak, and it says on the label, this was once sacrificed to some idol. Now, you'd say, well, this is a really good steak, and it's been sold at a discount. So maybe you wanted to buy that piece of meat. And as a Christian, you would say, I did not pray to that idol. I did not participate in any of these sacrifices. I just want to buy a steak. Paul would say, you can do that if it doesn't cause anybody else to stumble, and chances are you know somebody that's going to make them stumble. But if it's not going to make anybody else stumble, you can do that because you did not participate in the pagan ritual, the pagan sacrifice, the pagan prayer. So you can do that. It's probably not a good idea, but you can, as long as it's not going to cause anybody else to stumble. But that's different than what was happening here. There's one thing to buy a steak that somebody somewhere else you weren't even part of, they prayed to some false god. It's yet another thing to consciously participate in the pagan ritual, to be praying to that false god, to be making a sacrifice to the false god, to be part of that ritual. I remember years ago, a group of ministers and I, we used to go to this Chinese restaurant. And they had a Chinese buffet. They've since closed it down. It was sad because it was good food. But me and a bunch of ministers, we would go to this Chinese restaurant, this buffet. And at the buffet, at the little things that they have set up for the different foods, up in a corner on top of one of those displays, they had this little golden Buddha statue. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but it's a Buddha statue. He's got a belly hanging out. It's really big. I doubt that my other minister friends even noticed that Buddha statue was there. When we went and we ate Chinese food at that buffet, we did not participate in a pagan ritual. We didn't pray to Buddha. In fact, we prayed to Jesus over this food that he gave us. Again, I doubt any of the other ministers even noticed that statue was there, but if we asked them, I think all of us would have said the only thing that we have in common with the Buddha statue is we're all going to leave the buffet with that same belly. We weren't praying to Buddha or anything like that. But back to the church that we're talking about, they were not just buying a prime steak at a discount price. People from the church, your friends, your families, your neighbors, people in that trade union, they were going to these parties. And traditionally, these pagan festivals, they got wild. They got a little bit crazy. Now, we all know that there are certain gatherings, certain parties we should not go to. And you figure it out pretty quick. You say, oh, so-and-so's party. Oh, you don't want to go there. Things get crazy there. People are going to make some poor decisions there. We just know, as Christians, there are certain places we should not put ourselves into. In certain situations, one thing to go there and be surprised. Sometimes there's a reputation. You say, I know before I ever walk through that door, I ain't going there. I have no business being there. But here, people from the church, who, good Christians otherwise, they were going to these places. They were committing these pagan rituals. They were getting way too drunk, and they were doing some things they would probably regret later. So as a Christian, these church members had an awkward situation to deal with. You wanted to go to the company dinner. You felt like you had to for work, but you also wanted to because these are your friends, your family, your coworkers, your neighbors. These are your fellow church members. But your conscience would tell you, oh no, you can't go. Say, but I have to go and I want to go. But no, you can't. You cannot go and participate in those things. You know they're wrong. So this is where we get to the church in Thyatira that we read about in Revelation 2. This is where this applies to our lives. Have you ever risked losing a job because you would not do something unethical? Have you ever been at odds with your coworkers or an employer because they were pushing you to do something you knew you should not do, and you said, no, I'm not going to do that? And on one hand, it seemed like it would be easier just to play ball and go with the flow and just do it anyway. He said, no, as a Christian, I can't do that. Have you ever had to step up for what is right when other people were telling you, just play ball? It's fine. Everybody does this. Nobody will judge you for doing this. Nobody will ever know. I've heard that phrase in church before. No one will ever know. Not this church, thank God. But I've heard that said in churches before. Well, just do it. Nobody will ever know. Have you ever lost friends because you would not participate in something that you knew you had no business doing? Have you ever had a rift in your family over something and you felt like you were on the side of truth, but you were all alone there? And I'm not talking about a little disagreement in the family where two people have different opinions. I mean, there's a very clear right and wrong, and you stand up for what's right, and then you stand alone. See, in this church in Revelation, there was somebody that was moving through the church like a snake. They were whispering to everybody. Just picture kind of a snake-like person just kind of drifting in. They would go up, they'd get up in your ear, and they'd whisper, "Go ahead and do it. It's fine." They were tempting people to go to these festivals, to go to these parties, commit all these sexual sins, to do things that no Christian should be doing. And this person, they were teaching the church as though they had some kind of authority to do this. They were teaching people in the church, look, your relationship with God, that's all spirit. He doesn't care what happened to your body, which we know is anti-biblical. God does care what we do with the body that He gave to us. But this person that was going through the church like a snake, that was whispering in people's ears, said, "Oh, what happens to your body is inconsequential to what happens to your spirit." Now, I know many of us can attest to that being false. How many of you have ever had something going on with your body and that affected you in your spirit? I think many of us can say something's not right with our body. Sometimes that affects us spiritually. We can say all day, well, maybe I can just rise above it, but it's hard sometimes. When something happens to your body, it can affect you in a spiritual way, and it can be hard to get past that. Jesus calls that snake in the church Jezebel. That's probably not literally their name. Their name is probably not literally Jezebel, but he's using a name from a biblical character and calling them that. He says, "You're just like Jezebel." So, again, if I was to call you Rand McNally, if I was to nickname you Rand McNally, that probably means you have a pretty good sense of direction, right? You're pretty good at reading maps. Or you maybe don't even know a map, you know all the side roads. If I called you Colonel Sanders, you're pretty good at the herbs and spices. You know, you should be the one marinating the chicken at the barbecue. Jesus gives this person named Jezebel, and there's some baggage that comes with that. Not good baggage. Just for some quick context, I don't want to take us too far from our story in Revelation, but I think it's important to know what he means when he says Jezebel. Jezebel was the pagan wife of Israel's king Ahab, back in the book of 1 Kings. She was the pagan wife, so he's supposed to be the spiritual leader of his home, leading people to God. He's supposed to be the spiritual leader of his nation, leading people to God. But his pagan wife takes his marriage down and his nation down a road of Baal worship, of worshiping a false god. And so there's dire consequences to that. Also, in another story, a little bit further on, we see this moment where King Ahab wants to buy a vineyard. He offers to buy this vineyard from this guy, and this guy's like, "No, I don't really want to sell. I really like my vineyard. I don't want to sell it." Now, King Ahab, as king, he could have abused his authority, and he could have just taken it. But he didn't. But instead, he's at home, and he's just stomping around. He's so angry, he can't even eat. Well, his wife, Jezebel, sets up an elaborate scheme to defraud this person of their land, basically. There's a long story. Basically, she sets up an elaborate scheme to get this person out of their land, to forcibly take it from them. And one of the ways that she does is she speaks on behalf of the king. She's not the king. She doesn't have the authority of the king. What she wants is wrong, it's stealing, it's awful, but she uses authority that she does not have to get what she wants. And so, when we go into Revelation, in chapter 2, when this person is called Jezebel, I can't help but think, this person moves like a snake through that church in Thyatira, and under false pretenses, says things that they have no authority to say. They have no spiritual knowledge, even though they claim some exclusive spiritual knowledge. They have no knowledge or authority to say, but they give this teaching that leads people astray. And it's not for their good, it's because of what she wants. Let me ask you this morning, how many of you have ever known a Jezebel? How many of you have ever known somebody who they're all too eager to whisper into your ear and to tell you what you ought to be doing? Not necessarily for your own good, but for what they want. And maybe they tell a lie to you, and they go over here and they tell a lie to somebody else, a lie to somebody else, a lie to somebody else. And they've got this whole system going, they've got this whole network going, and it's not for anybody's good, but for theirs, for some underlying agenda that they have. All too eager to put their arm around you and whisper in your ear, they have some great advice for you. It's not for you. It's for what they want. It's for their agenda. What they want to see happen. Now, we haven't looked at the actual verses in Revelations 2 yet, and didn't even mention to you the name of the town at first, because I wanted you to realize as we go through this passage, without even looking at the verses at first, that this sounds very much like something that could happen today, doesn't it? If I didn't even tell you it was from the Bible, you could have said, well, this is just something that happened in our modern day, because it sounds like something that could, and does. The idea of a thriving church in a small town with a thriving textile industry and metal workers. We don't have the union culture in the South, but again, we're familiar with it, we know about it. And many of us have been to some version or another of a company party. Maybe not a large Fortune 500 company party, but I think many of us have been to some version of some gathering of coworkers for work or just getting together. We get that concept, I think. And I think for many of us, even though we may not have a personal experience of this ourselves, we are familiar with that concept of the company party that goes too far, right? We've heard those stories. I don't personally have one of those stories myself. I haven't been to a company party that went too far, but I know about it. I think many of us, if we haven't experienced ourselves, we know that there are times when there's the company party that goes too crazy and mistakes get made. But even beyond that, it may not be a company party for you. It may be a small circle of friends that's gathered together and they're talking and they're gossiping. And now you want to participate with your friends, your family, your coworkers in this conversation, but do you really want to participate in their gossip or slandering somebody else? I remember asking a group of friends of mine that were gathered together in a circle gossiping about somebody else that was part of a group of friends that wasn't there. And I kind of joined in, I laughed with them, and I stopped dead in my tracks and said, wait, y'all talk about me like this when I'm not here? They laughed, no. Yeah, you do. Maybe it's a circle of people who are all telling a joke and it's racist. Do you laugh along awkwardly because you don't want to rock the boat? Do you call them out? Do you excuse yourself? What are you going to do? Sometimes we just kind of go along with the flow. Sometimes maybe we laugh along, we think it's even okay. And I bet we've all known some Jezebels who will steer us into doing things with words like, no one will know. Everybody does this, it's fine. No one's going to judge you for it. Who's it going to hurt? You see, while a lot of churches were in the minority for their faith. As we go through Revelation, a lot of these churches that we talk about, they were in the minority of their faith. They were living in towns where it was just them. It was just a small handful of people, comparatively speaking. There was a group of believers, and you had all these people on the outside that wanted them dead. You even had Jewish people who resented the Christians and wanted them dead. So you had people that should be your cousins in the faith, and you had people who didn't agree with you at all, and all these people who wanted you dead for being a Christian. But not this town. This town, mainly Christians. These are people who say they believe like you. You're in a small town in a thriving church, but they made one concession after another. You make a little concession here. You make a little concession here with your faith. They didn't face death by persecution, but they faced the potential of death by too many concessions. The death of their faith, the death of their church, by gradually giving it away to the enemy. At this gathering, making this choice. Small little concessions. What will they ever hurt? I'll give the devil just a little bit of territory here in my life. I'll give the devil just a little bit of territory here in my life. It can't hurt. It's just a prayer to a false god. It's just watching or saying something that I shouldn't say. It's participating in some things I shouldn't do. It's stealing a little bit, but it's not going to hurt anybody. Or it's against somebody's character, but they'll never know. They'll never find out that I was part of it. Does that sound like something that we as a church, in our own local context, could encounter? We could encounter gossip and slander and the kind of alienation of not participating with friends in certain things you know you have no business to, and then you stop getting invited from the things you would have gone to. We as a church, in a predominantly Christian culture around us, we can identify with persecution of a different kind. We might not be threatened of our lives. But if you as a Christian are standing up for your faith, if you're standing up for what's right, there's a different persecution that might await you. Are you going to stand up for what's right? Are you going to risk being the only person in the room sometimes that stands up for what's right? Even though it might cost you friendships, it might cost you a standing with your job, even though you might not get invited back to something, even though people might not return your phone calls, even though it might cost you some things. It may not cost you your life, but sometimes standing up for what's right, it may cost you other ways. Will you stand up? Will you hold on to what you have in Christ? There's a lot of things out in this world for us to hold on to. Metaphorically, I guess we could say our little electronics. There's things on there for us to hold on to. There's things on TV and media. There's people and relationships for us to hold on to. There's all kinds of things for us to hold on to, and not all that stuff's bad. But first and foremost, do we hold on to Christ, even if it means we have to let go of some things? When we read in Revelation chapter 2, verse 24, the entire passage of Revelation chapter 2, this whole passage to this church anyway, is in your notes, and I encourage you to read that on your own. But I want to just focus in on one part of it, starting with verse 24. No, I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, to you who do not hold to her teaching and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets, I will not impose any other burden on you except to hold on to what you have until I come. Now, what did that mean to the original hearers of that? What did that mean to them? It means that Jesus recognized that there were people who were not going to fall for Jezebel's message. Instead, they held on to what they learned from God's Word. Jesus recognized that they were already under a heavy burden. And he said, I'm not going to make life any harder for you than it has to be. I'm not going to let you be crushed by this and by other things. He encourages them, hold on just a little while longer until I come. And now, what does this passage mean for us? What does it mean for us to hold on to what we have? It means like when you feel like you're falling, when you feel like you're about to drown. Sometimes somebody will come up in the waters beside you and say, get on my back and I'll swim you safely to shore. And sometimes that person's a shark. Hey, get on my back, I'll carry you to safety. Oh no. Oh no. Sometimes there'll be people in your life that will offer you a way out who really have their own agenda in mind, want to drag you further under the sea, might seek to destroy you. When in fact, God sent His only Son, Jesus Christ, and the life preserver has already been thrown in the water. We have to grab onto that life preserver, Jesus Christ, to truly be saved, to truly be pulled up out of those waves. He has sent us the perfect rescue. There's no one else that we have to hold on to but Jesus Christ. That self-help book or that TV talk show might promise you the deep secrets of living well. How many of you have heard that phrase that way before? There's a secret to living well. If you just decode this, if you understand the secret knowledge, then you'll have a good life. But the truth is, there's no deep secret about it. That we can have life and have it more abundantly, Jesus says. And there's no deep secret to decoding it. God has given us the greatest love letter that's ever been written. And it's not locked up. There's not a lock on the book. But it's the greatest love letter that's already been written that He presents to His bride, the church, for anybody to read. If any of us want to read it, all those truths are in there. We don't have to go looking far for it. We don't have to decode some kind of mystery. That God's truths are right there in His Word for anyone to read. If we will just take those truths into our heart and hold on to that. Our challenge this morning is that we might be like that church that we mentioned in this passage this morning. Defined not by conceding the battle, but by persevering. Defined by love, service to others, faithfulness, and persevering in our faith. Whatever it is right now that might make you feel like you're surrounded, might make you feel like waves, like sharks circling you in the water, hold on to what you have in Christ above all else. This morning, if you feel like you're being pulled in a lot of different directions, Today is the day to choose the one and only direction that really matters. Jesus Christ. The way, the truth, and the life. Once we put Him first in our life, all the other stuff will fall in place in His way and His time, His will. Perhaps this morning you'd like to join the church. We are people who are just seeking to hold on to Jesus alongside each other as we support each other in this road together. As we sing this final song, I'd love to pray with you. If you'd like to come up, I'll be standing right here. You may wish to stand by yourself and pray, or kneel or stand at this prayer bench. You can do that as well. You can come up and pray alongside somebody if they're praying and show your solidarity with them. However the Lord leads, won't you please come forward as we sing this final song.